Hi and welcome to this week's Wu Wei Wisdom Life Lessons teaching. It's great to be back with you all. This week we are talking all about anger, revenge and retribution. And you'll discover why it can be so easy to get stuck and bogged down in these emotions and feelings, and how you can finally let go of anger and the need for revenge and move on. Okay, David, so let's get straight to it. In the Wu Wei Wisdom model, what are the root causes of anger?
Well, I think you have to go right to the core of the model. And for those of you who are new to our model, this is perhaps one of the most important teachings. You are the creator of your emotions. You are not the victim of them. So if you're creating anger, don't focus on the emotion of anger. Try and focus on the beliefs or the thoughts that create the anger. And this is where I believe a lot of people get confused. They'll use words like, I'm an angry person. Oh, it's just my nature. I fly off the handle. This isn't who you are. You're much deeper and more profound than that. So really in this teaching, we want to understand that emotions are always the consequences. You can't be a victim of an emotion that you're creating.
But David, you tell me, in a lot of circumstances, anger or frustration is an appropriate, normal, healthy emotion if we encounter some inappropriate behaviour from a person, some form of injustice, some form of unfairness. Isn't anger a normal response?
I think you're right, Alex, to bring that out, because I think that's the number one thing that people get confused with that teaching. I'm not saying you shouldn't create emotions. I'm saying the opposite. Emotions are natural, normal to create an emotion. But the difference is you're creating it. And then here's the core of the teaching. Do not react. Do not make judgments from the emotion. Make judgments from the core belief and the thought that created the emotion. So what is it you believe? What is it you think? That's where you should be focusing and anchoring yourself. And that's where you'll make the real difference, rather than acting impulsively from anger. We're talking about anger, but it could be any emotion. But rather than being more angry or creating more anger, you go back to the belief or the thought.
So what would be the belief or the thought in a typical situation where we'd experience anger?
Well, it normally goes back to what we would call the inner child. And for those, again, new, the inner child is a part of your mind that you may want to call your ego or your subconscious mind. And it's a part of your mind that was formed in childhood. And I believe the ages of around 6, 9 years old are very important. And this is where we gather our beliefs. And so if you're a person that's always creating the emotion of anger, I would say, look in your beliefs. And there's a belief about unfairness, injustice, the way things should be or should have been. So this will relate to if you've had a very dysfunctional childhood, or perhaps your parents favoured a sibling, or maybe you were bullied at school or something like that. There is like the kernel, the seed that lies right at the core of your beliefs. And then when something happens currently in today's world, it's almost like it lights the spark, and then you suddenly create the angry emotion.
And so I guess we're differentiating here between an appropriate emotional response, which we would call anger, but an uncomfortable or painful red light feeling response in the spark of a moment, which would be appropriate given a situation. compared to if we are constantly being triggered, if our emotions, our anger is always there, or it's a frequent occurrence, or we're just holding on to sort of kind of resentment or frustration all the time, that is unhealthy, inappropriate, and that is when you're saying we need to look at what's going on with our inner child and what are the thoughts or beliefs that our inner child is holding on to that is creating this more ongoing state of red light emotions.
I think you use an important word there, Alex, the word triggered, and many of my clients will use that word. But if you think about that, I was triggered. What is it that's being triggered? It's not your emotions that are being triggered. It's your belief that's being triggered. Something happened, and it's almost like it touches a sore point. So as you said, again, anger in the appropriate place can be an appropriate emotion. But if you're triggered, you're bringing forward all of those old beliefs, that view, that perception of the world, so you can overreact and go into a really kind of strong emotion of anger, not because of the situation you're currently facing, but because of all that stuff, that history that you're bringing forward. And then you'll hear yourself saying things like, here we go again. It always happens to me. Why do they always treat me disrespectful? Why does this, why? And it's always these, what I call in the model, the unresolved beliefs, the unresolved issues that you need to go back and sort out.
And the problem is, David, that if we will encounter challenging people, situations which are inappropriate, people which are inappropriate. That's life. We can't control that. But if we are very reactive all the time and in an ongoing state of emotional red light feelings, we are not able to respond calmly, logically, creatively, in our flow to these challenging people or challenging situations. The red light emotion of anger kind of disables us. And in the long term, if we keep generating a feeling of anger at the slightest skirmish, it's almost like a form of self-harm if we're accepting that we are creating that emotion.
That's right. And people will do this for two main reasons. It's like the pendulum we talk about. They'll either create anger because it believes it puts them in control, pushes people away, makes them kind of on top of the situation, or it'll be the other side where here we go again, as I just said. It proves that I'm a victim. It proves that people don't respect me. It proves that people go against me. And so rather than dealing with it in the center, in Wu Wei, that's what Wu Wei means, in your flow. And I guess this would be the life lesson of this teaching of anger and retribution. You're not dealing with it from the source of who you are, that divine spiritual person that can deal with things appropriately. You're not dealing proactively, you're dealing reactively. And then this anger, this feeling that you're creating, never underestimate that. That is so powerful inside of you. But remember, and this is such an important teaching, no one else feels your emotions. You can be as angry as you want to be. You can create this intense feeling. Those around you are not experiencing that feeling. You are creating that feeling and you are experiencing. And one of the teachings that always comes to mind when I deal with clients with this anger, it's like drinking poison and expecting other people to suffer. The only one that will suffer with you creating this intense, powerful feeling of anger is you. And no issue will ever get resolved by you blowing your top.
And David, do you think that if we're in the mode of regularly experiencing anger or heavy frustration, and it's because we are holding inner child beliefs, or we're allowing inner child beliefs to drive our emotional reaction. So beliefs like you said, the world's against me, life's unfair, this always happens to me, how dare they, everyone's a problem, and things are never going to work, those sort of beliefs. So we allow those beliefs to drive us. So we're on the inner child path now. The inner child is navigating our response and our reaction to life. By seeking revenge and retribution, that's almost like another layer of inner childness, because we have the anger in the moment as to what's happening with that person or that situation, which obviously we can keep that alive, that anger emotion alive in our memory by rethinking about how unjust, how unfair. But as soon as we start to say, right, there must be a retribution here. I need to right the wrong. They must apologize. I need to get them back. As soon as we also then trip down the inner child belief that we can control this and we can make everything perfect and we can make them pay and we can make them see what they've done wrong, it's like putting another heavy, energetic, negative layer onto us, which moves us away from our authenticity, our creativity, our ability to flow, our ability to find inner peace, calm, and resolution.
I'm smiling, Alex, because you just repeated what many of my clients will say to me, and you've just expressed it perfectly. So this is what the inner child will think, because the inner child part of your mind sees things very much in black and white, yes and no, good and bad, and it sees injustice and unfairness. And so for an inner child, when something is unfair, it believes it's owed and it should be put right. It's they did it, they should now put it right. And if this is the core of your belief, you're going to be swinging on this pendulum for the rest of your life, because the inner child will always see unfairness and injustice in everything in life then, at work, in relationships, at home, with family, with friends. They will always be seeking out the unfairness to prove their point. There you go, look, there it has happened again. They wouldn't do that. They think I'm not good enough. They don't treat me with respect. It's what I call cherry picking. The inner child will always look for those points and those incidences which proves its point. And then the next thing, as you've just quite rightly explained, it wants to be recompensed. It believes it's owed. It should be put right. And so it's always looking externally for other people to right the wrongs. I smiled when you said that, because just a couple of days ago, that's exactly the term a client used. So when you heard what Alex was saying and you kind of said, I agree with her, that's right, that's right. That's your inner child. That's your inner child. Because every time you go down this competitive road of fighting, they've done me wrong, they have to be put right, every step you're doing, you're moving farther and farther away from your Shen, your spirituality, who you really are. And you're entering into a boxing match where no one wins.
And David, when you talked about this cherry picking, that it rings so true, because this kind of confirmation bias that the inner child does, if our inner child, that part of our mind, that part of our psyche that has developed in childhood because of misunderstandings, that we believe we're not good enough, that we're not lovable, that we're not going to be able to cope, that the world's a horrible place, people are against us, all those things. The inner child part of our mind becomes hypersensitive to external situations or people in our adult life which play into that story. But the irony is, so this is when you're triggered very easily. You're on guard. You're watching for people to ignore you, to snub you, to mistreat you. And often people would say that they are like having to walk on eggshells around you because you're so hypersensitive. But the irony is, David, that same person is not hypersensitive to all the times when people treat them respectfully, when things go right, when things flow for them. There's a hypersensitivity on the misguided beliefs that the inner child's holding on to, but not the greater picture of what's going on in the world, what's flowing in the world around them.
And this is why this inner child work is so important to understand. And, I repeat myself, but it's so important. You can't change what you don't understand. And this is why we do these life lesson teachings. It's for you to take a step back and look at yourself. Because if you got this inner child victim mentality, do you believe that everything or everybody's against you? Do you think you always get the wrong end of the stick? Do you always get the rough things? Does it not work out for you? And then trace back to see where this originated from. And as I said at the beginning, I think you'll find it originates in your childhood around that period I identified, 6, 9, not exact, but around that period where things were happening, real things, true things in your life, and your view on it, this is something wrong with me. We call it the 3 lies. I'm not good enough. Have you ever said that to yourself in your self-talk? I can't cope. I'm unlovable, or I don't deserve it, or I'm unworthy, something like that. And if you're saying those things to yourself, then the perception that you view a current situation will use, as Alex said, that triggered word. You are overreacting to the situation. And by overreacting, I mean you are not dealing with it from that center ground, from that authenticity, from that inner strength. You're acting in a reactive way from your emotions because you can blame your emotions. And maybe later you can say to the person, oh, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said that. I was angry. You can then use it as an excuse rather than being more in and grounded in your Shen, in who you really are.
And also, David, I think it's worth saying that some people who are, I guess we would say, oh, they're an angry person or they're aggressive, they do it as a form of self-protection. They push people away. They're more aggressive. They're more yangy because of inner child fears that they're not good enough, that they're going to get hurt. And that is where the anger comes from. It's like a mask.
That's right. So you're talking about the pendulum there again, Alex. So some people can be angry externally, but also people can be angry internally. They can be angry with themselves. They can chastise themselves later. I should have acted better. I should have been more direct. I should have been able to deal with that. So they can be very angry with themselves. So other people can't see this creation of the emotion of anger. It goes back to what I said about the poison. Then they run the scenarios time and time again, building up the emotion about themselves. So here's the pendulum. Some people can create this emotion externally to others or internally to themselves. And this is why it's so important to really meditate and think about this teaching. You are the creator of your emotions, not the victim of them. Nothing wrong with emotions. They're natural and normal. But every emotion that you experience in your body, you have created. The question I would ask you is, do you believe that? And I can tell you what a lot of my clients say. Yes, intellectually I do, David, but. And when you hear the word but, it means forget what I've just said. Because there's a part of me, and I would call that part of you that doesn't believe this, your inner child. Because it always wants to use the emotions as the excuse for being on the pendulum.
So, David, when we encounter unfairness, injustice, inappropriate behaviour, inappropriate situations, I guess the message is we don't want to default into that inner child part of our mind and then let the inner child beliefs, misunderstandings, run our response and our emotional reaction and let everything get clouded up and inflamed and move us away from an authentic response. We want to be able to tap into our authentic self, the part of us that is what you would call the Shen, the spiritual self, our true authentic inner wisdom, and let that inform our thought process, our reactions, our responses. But a lot of people would misunderstand at this point and think, oh, well, you're saying, David, that we should have no response. We should just accept inappropriate behavior. We should just accept injustices that are happening and do nothing. We should act like a doormat. Is that the case?
I'm saying the opposite, really, Alex. And I can tell you where this normally comes on in these two words that I deal with. The difference between confrontation and confronting. So again, many times I hear from my clients, they don't deal with confrontation. And I'm agreeing with them because confrontation means you're bringing in the emotion. I believe that you should be able to confront situations from that grounded place that we're calling Shen, your authenticity, if you consider that better, your intelligence, if you prefer that word. This is who you are. So if somebody is being inappropriate, disrespectful, not addressing you correctly, you should be able to contact that inner strength inside of you and stand up to them and in a calm, normal voice say, this is wrong. You don't speak to me like that. I don't accept that. I think you will find that far more powerful and far more effective than flying off the handle, raising your voice, showing them a red face. Because in a very bizarre way, for some people, they see that as a weakness. They see that as you are not in control. And these teaching, these life lessons that we go through is to be in control, to be accountable. This is what I want for you. You have an immense inner strength. You know it's there and I know it's there. And every time you go to your emotions and say, oh, I'm scared, or I'm frightened, or I'm angry, all this, all that, and you use the emotion, you're moving farther and farther away from who you really are. And that difference between confrontation and confronting is much more powerful. And even if somebody is losing their temper with you or being angry with you, to be steady, to be calm, to be in your Shen is far more effective than reaching up to their anger and then you start this confrontational screaming and shouting when at the end, if it's a family member or a work colleague, you have to go and apologize afterwards anyway. Why not stay in the position where you don't have to apologize, where everything you're saying is what you actually mean and comes from somewhere that the truth, the honesty and the integrity.
So, David, do you think that if we can disengage from the inner child, connect to our Shen, our inner wisdom, it obviously helps diffuse the emotions and allows us to focus on creatively addressing the situations, confronting the situation in a calm but practical and intentional way. But I also imagine that it allows us to broaden our perspective on the situation, take a more global view rather than taking everything so personally as the inner child does and then allowing the emotions to get whipped up. And I would imagine tapping into our Shen, our authenticity, allows us to have greater empathy and compassion for the other people involved in the situation, to maybe try and see their perspective a little bit, which still may be misguided, but it allows space for compassion for others and compassion for ourselves, which I think would then produce a healthier outcome to any situation where there was an imbalance.
We touched on one important word there about being personal. So the inner child will see these things as personal. So you're absolutely right on that. It's just something far more important, because when those people around you see that you don't react, see that you will deal with it from a calm, centered place, it affects them as well.
Yeah.
So they will start not to get a reaction so quickly, and they will change the way they deal with you. And so this has a two-way effect. I can tell you, though, why some people won't want to do this is because they do not want to do it because of their emotions again. They say, well, I can't stand up to somebody. I can't say my point. I won't be heard. And it will be all these inner child beliefs that we talked about. So we've kind of gone the full circle, and we come back to, what do you believe? Why do you believe it? What is those core fundamental beliefs that is creating this overreaction that you can't deal with a situation without sparking into the emotion of anger, or then looking for retribution and creating resentment.
Wonderful. Thank you, David. And we have several more teachings on anger management, and a whole playlist on our inner child teachings, which will help you understand more about the origin of the sort of beliefs, the inner child beliefs that we've been talking about today, and also how you can work through them and resolve them, so that when you meet life challenges, when you meet inappropriate situations or inappropriate people, you can tap into that authenticity and deal with it in a much more authentic and healthy way. I really, really hope you have enjoyed this teaching. If you have struggled with anger or dealt with it or resolved it, please do let us know. Share your story with us. We would love to hear from you. Next week, David is publishing a beautiful new guided meditation on dealing with anger and resolving anger and letting it go. So please do tune in for that. If you'd like to work one-to-one with David on any of the issues we've talked about today, David works with clients all over the world by Zoom video call every week. And I will put a link in the show notes to learn more about David's sessions. And finally, please don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. We produce new long-form teachings every Saturday, as well as 2 midweek short snippets of wisdom for you to enjoy. So do subscribe. We look forward to sharing with you again very soon. Bye-bye.